Imagine this. You and your friends decide to go on an adventurous mountain hike, seeking thrill and escape from the chaos of the city. But what if you were never meant to leave? What if the mountains were more than just towering peaks and endless trees? Every year, hikers disappear on Black Hollow Peak, never to be found. No bodies, no traces. And those who do return, they are never the same. They speak of something watching from the mist, something that calls their names in the wind, something that doesn't let them leave. What if the path you take is not leading you forward, but pulling you deeper into something else's territory? The hike began early in the morning. Aaron, Michelle, Jake, and Lisa had been planning this trip for weeks. They were experienced hikers but had never attempted Black Hollow Peak, an isolated trail far from civilization. The warnings from locals were strange. Stories of people vanishing, voices whispering in the trees, and unnatural things lurking in the fog. But they laughed it off. "It's just a scary legend," Jake had said while packing his gear. The first few hours were peaceful. The air was fresh, the path was well marked, and everything seemed normal. But then, the fog rolled in. Not the usual mountain mist. This was different. It was thick, unnatural, suffocating. Within minutes, their surroundings became eerily silent. No birds, no rustling leaves, no distant sounds of animals, just absolute crushing silence. Lisa stopped suddenly. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Everyone froze. The air around them felt heavier, almost pressing against their skin. At first, there was nothing. Then faintly, so faint it was almost impossible to notice, a voice whispered from the trees. "Aaron, Michelle, Jake, Lisa." Their breaths hitched. The sound was coming from everywhere and nowhere at once, as if the trees themselves were whispering their names. Aaron tried to laugh, but his voice wavered. "It's just the wind, right?" Jake turned back toward the path, but his face went pale. "Guys, look at this." There were footsteps on the ground, but not their own. They were fresh, leading in circles, surrounding them. Panic started setting in. The more they walked, the more the path seemed to twist on itself, leading them right back to where they started. The trees seemed closer than before, tighter, more suffocating. And then they saw it. A figure stood in the fog, tall, motionless, completely still. It was impossible to tell if it was human. Its face was hidden in the mist, its body slightly distorted like a mirage. The group froze, staring. The figure didn't move, didn't breathe. Aaron swallowed hard. "Hello?" No response. Then its head snapped sideways at an unnatural angle, as if its neck had broken. Lisa screamed. Jake grabbed her wrist, yanking her back. "Run." They bolted down the trail, their breath coming in ragged gasps. But no matter how fast they ran, they kept returning to the same place, the spot where the figure had first appeared. But now, it was gone. Then, Lisa vanished. 1 second she was running beside them, the next, her footsteps stopped. Aaron turned back. She was gone. No scream. No sound. Just gone. Jake spun in circles, shouting her name. But all they could hear was a low, distorted whisper growing closer. They ran again. The trees twisted around them, the fog growing thicker. Then, Michelle disappeared. Aaron turned just in time to see something yanking her into the mist, her hand reaching out before she was swallowed whole. Jake and Aaron were the only ones left. They kept moving, not knowing where they were going. They could hear soft footsteps behind them, following them, matching their pace. Aaron whispered, "Don't look back." But Jake did. His scream was cut off. Something pulled him into the trees. Aaron saw only a glimpse, long skeletal fingers wrapping around Jake's throat before the forest swallowed him whole. Now, Aaron was alone. The whispers were deafening now, crawling into his mind. The fog was pressing against him. He could barely breathe. Then, the last thing he saw before passing out was a circle of faceless figures surrounding him, whispering in unison, "You were never meant to leave." 2 days later, a search team found Aaron. He was alive, but barely. His face was sunken, his eyes hollow, his lips dry and cracked. He wouldn't speak, wouldn't move. When they finally got him to whisper something, it was one sentence. "They're still there, waiting." Imagine driving through a quiet mountain road as night falls, the cold air creeping into your bones. You're lost, your phone has no signal, and the darkness around you is endless. Then suddenly, a light appears in the distance. A lodge. A place to rest. A place to be safe. But what if it isn't a place to save you? What if you were never supposed to find it? And once you enter, you can never leave. Mark and Emily had been driving for hours through the mountain pass. Their plan was simple, a weekend getaway in a remote cabin, away from work, stress, and the city. The road was empty, just towering pine trees stretching into the sky, their dark shapes twisting under the dim moonlight. It started with a snowstorm. Without warning, thick flakes of snow began to fall. Within minutes, visibility dropped. The road became slick, the car tires slipping on the icy surface. Mark gripped the wheel tightly, his knuckles turning white. Emily checked her phone, no signal. "We should stop," she whispered, anxiety creeping into her voice. Mark's jaw tightened. "We can't. We're in the middle of nowhere." Then, through the white haze of the snowstorm, they saw it. A wooden lodge stood in the distance, its windows glowing with warm golden light. Smoke curled from the chimney. It looked old but well-maintained, nestled between the trees. A sign above the door read, "Everwood Lodge Vacancy." Relieved, they pulled into the small, snow-covered parking lot. The moment they stepped inside, something felt off. The lobby was beautiful, wooden beams, a roaring fireplace, old-fashioned furniture. But there were no guests. Only a single man standing behind the reception desk. He was tall, too thin, his face stretched into an unsettling grin. His eyes, too dark, too hollow. "You're just in time," he said. Mark hesitated. "For what?" The man's smile widened. "For your stay, of course." Emily shivered as she glanced around. There were no personal belongings. No luggage. No signs of anyone else. The receptionist handed them a heavy brass key. "Room 207, he said softly. "You'll be safe there." Something about the way he said it made Emily's stomach twist. The hallway was too long. The carpet, too plush, like it was swallowing their footsteps. The walls, lined with old portraits of people with hollow eyes. They reached their room. The moment they stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind them. Mark turned the knob. It was locked from the outside. "Hello," he called, banging on the door. No response. Emily backed away from the door and gasped. The room was changing. The wallpaper peeled back on its own, revealing rotting wood. The bed, covered in dust, as if it hadn't been used in decades. The mirror, cracked, its reflection showing a dark figure standing behind them. A soft knock came from inside the closet. Mark's breathing turned shallow. Slowly, he stepped forward, hand trembling as he reached for the handle. He pulled it open. Nothing. Just an old, empty closet. Then, Emily screamed. She pointed at the bed. There was someone lying under the covers. The blanket rose and fell as if someone was breathing underneath it. Mark grabbed the edge of the blanket and yanked it off. The bed was empty, but the indent of a body still remained in the mattress. Then, the whispers began. Soft, distant, but coming closer. The same words, over and over. "You should not be here. You should not be here." The air grew thick, suffocating. The lights flickered. Then, the bathroom door creaked open on its own. Inside, a bathtub full of water. But the water was black. thick, moving. Emily stepped closer, mesmerized. Then, a hand burst out of the water, grabbing her wrist. She screamed, pulling away as a face emerged, grey, lifeless, eyes sunken into its skull. Mark dragged her out of the bathroom just as the whispering turned into laughter. The walls began to bleed. The paintings on the walls shifted, the people in them now watching them. They ran to the door, but it was gone. Not locked. Gone. Only a blank wall remained where the door had been. Mark turned in circles. There has to be a way out. Then a voice, deep, hollow, right behind them. There is no way out. They turned. The receptionist stood in the center of the room, grinning. But his face was different now, longer, stretched, his mouth impossibly wide. Mark grabbed a chair and smashed it against the wall. Nothing. Emily fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. The lights went out. And then, silence. When Mark opened his eyes, he was standing in the middle of the forest. Emily was gone. The lodge was gone. His car was there, covered in snow, as if it had been sitting there for years. A search team found him the next morning, alone, dazed, unable to speak. When they asked him where Emily was, he only whispered. She never left the lodge. But when the search team checked the area, there was no lodge. No sign it had ever existed. Only a faded wooden sign buried in the snow, half broken. It read, Everwood Lodge, closed since 1952.